Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. The topic of this 10-minute moan is the lies, the amount of money and the inaccuracies of Scottish Government's reaction to the cash report. Okay, now before I start, people always ask, how can you help the channel? There's loads of ways. You can subscribe, you can even become a member if you want, but the easiest way for anybody to help the channel is click the thumbs up button. It does wonders for our reach, so thank you. Now, yesterday in Parliament, Scottish Holyrood, the Minto, the minister, got up and made a speech about a response to the cash report. Now, what she said in Parliament may not be what I'm about to read. I'm just reading out from ScotGov's website her statement, which is now in record. But we've already seen, as previously as this week, that what gets put down as what ministers have said in Parliament is not always exactly what they said. So I do apologise if any of the words that I read out are not verbatim to what she said in Parliament, because the SNP have already got forum for changing the words and writing down different things on their website. Okay, so the first thing was, she said, I want to start by speaking directly to our young people, and in particular our trans and non-binary young people across Scotland. I know these last few weeks and months have been incredibly difficult with increased media attention and toxic online commentary. I understand how shocking, upsetting and destabilising the announcements last week and the public conversation around them will have been for you and your families. Now, that's the first thing I've got a wee bit of a point and a problem with. She says it must be shocking, upsetting and destabilising, the announcements for last week. Now, the announcements for last week were the cash report. The cash report, let me remind you, is there to protect the trans and non-binary young people in Scotland. So you would think any group that would welcome it would be, in fact, the trans and non-binary youths in Scotland, because the findings are to protect their health and well-being going forward. So I don't know how anybody who is truly trans and wishing to, get better treatment for them, or indeed their children if you're a concerned parent, I'm not sure how that would be upsetting and destabilising at all. It should be welcoming and refreshing that clinicians, quite clever people, have got your interests at heart, not the perceived interests by people who are neither transgender, non-binary, or even parents in the vast majority of cases. I find that quite bizarre. Another bit I found bizarre was going on about the Butte House agreement. If you just bear with me and I'll find that. I want to reassure you that the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed, not just to ensuring ongoing support is available for you, but to reforming and improving gender identity healthcare. This was a key part of the Butte House agreement, and we will not waver in that commitment. Now, this bit intrigues me for the simple fact she's had to mention the Butte House agreement. The Butte House agreement that the Greens are going to vote on soon, with a view of letting their members decide whether the Butte House agreement should be put in the bin or not. But what I find even more intriguing is the SNP government are trying to claim they're nice and cuddly and like trans and non-gender, non-binary people. Sorry. If that was the case, it would need to be part of the Butte House agreement, because it would already be in their manifesto. The fact that it's in the Butte House agreement would strongly suggest that it was brought to the table by the Greens, or it wouldn't need to be in the Butte House agreement, because if looking after transgender youths was in the SNP's manifesto, the Greens wouldn't have needed it to be put in part of the Butte House agreement, because they've already committed to it in the SNP. So it's obvious from that comment that the Greens brought in the transgender issue to the table as part of the Butte House agreement. And this concerns me, as I've said in a few videos before. The Green Party are an environmental party. That's what they set out to do. That's what they are. However, they seem to have brought to the table more issues on LGBT rights than environmental rights. And that concerns me somewhat, because the Green Party seem to be becoming something that they weren't intended to be. And I've been hearing from people with their ear closer to the ground than me on green issues that the proper Green Party, the sort of UK-wide Green Party, have had enough of the Scottish Greens because of their insistence to get their nose involved in things that are not green issues. For example, gender. So the Scottish Greens seem to be a different gang from the actual normal Greens. When you look at the staff that represent them in Holyrood, your Harveys, your Slaters and your Ross Greers, these people are oddballs. Okay? And I have no qualms in saying it whatsoever. None of them have children, but every one of them has got a severe interest, strange severe interest in young people, and particularly transgender and gay young people. I find that odd, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, the other thing that he said was about, let me reiterate what the First Minister had clearly said. The CAS review is a detailed piece of work that requires thoughtful consideration. Can't disagree with that. But he also went on to say, as I've said consistently, it's not for politicians nor civil servants to make clinical decisions about clinical pathways. These decisions should always be made carefully based on the best evidence available and be made only by clinicians responsible for providing such health care. To be very clear, ministers do not make clinical decisions in any field of medicine, and gender identity services is no exception. Well, you might want to tell Patrick Harvey that, because he is a minister, and he has already went in camera saying and disputing the accuracy of the CAS review, when he said he couldn't agree with it because there's been far too much criticism of it. Criticism from who? No criticism from clinicians. Criticism from crackpots online, right? And his own Rainbow Greens, who found 100 of them to make a signatory on a petition to force a vote by the members of the Green Party whether they should put the Butte House Agreement in the bin or not. So, to be very clear, ministers do not make clinical decisions in any field. Go and tell wee Patrick that, right? Because he's totally different to that. The other bit was, this bit is just a lie. This bit is something I can't believe the mainstream media is letting them away with. I know some members in this chamber have expressed disappointment that the Scottish Government did not announce this position before the Health Board statement. Presiding officer, every single one of us in this chamber, indeed every single one of us across Scotland, has a right to hear first and directly from the services caring for us if our treatment or any health matter is going to change. That is why it was absolutely correct that before making public announcements, NHS Glasgow and Clyde and NHS Lothian took time to speak to all the young people who would be impacted by this pause, so they understood what this meant to their care and treatment. Now, let me tell you why I can call bullshit on this. And if I'm wrong, send me a lawyer's letter, right? What happened was, CAS report came out, then made up nothing. Then the NHS Glasgow, particularly Sandiford Clinic, apparently contacted everybody that was affected by this pause of giving out puberty blockers and prescriptions. And then the Scottish Government were able to talk about it. That's what they're saying. So what they were saying was all these people that were affected by this pause in prescriptions was very, very important to them. So that's why they didn't say anything for nearly a week. Bollocks. The simple reason that is bollocks is people who are currently being given these puberty blockers on prescription are not affected. It's only people going forward in the future that will not be able to prescribe them. So the amount of young people you would have to speak to because of the impact caused by the pause of prescribing puberty blockers is zero. You would have to speak to nobody. The only people who might have been affected would be those who are currently on puberty blockers, and that's no changing. So the government could easily have put out a statement discussing CAS report and assuring those vulnerable young people that they tell us are so concerned about, that those who are currently on puberty blockers, nothing will change. So you delayed this statement, apparently, so that the NHS Glasgow could talk to all the young people who were impacted by stopping to give out new prescriptions on puberty blockers. That figure, by definition, is hee-haw. You're telling us lies, and we should be used to it. The other amazing thing that came out on this statement was, wait here, this one. The Scottish Government is committed to invest £9 million to support the improvement of NHS gender identity healthcare in Scotland. Now, I'm kind of guessing that through normal NHS budgets, the NHS decide where they split it, cardiovascular, all these different areas within the NHS. So if the Scottish Government's committed to invest £9 million purely on gender identity healthcare, that must be over and above whatever we already give the NHS to operate as a full function. That's incredible. Could we have maybe some money for people with obesity, people with cancer, people with heart disease? That would be nice. That, you give the NHS a load of money every year and say, do with that whatever you wish, and then give them an extra £9 million that you've identified as just for gender identity healthcare. Intriguing. Now, what you're also going to see is, since December 2022, which is just over a year ago, we have invested over £2.8 million to support work to improve access to gender identity healthcare. This is one of the sort of buzzword things. I don't really know what it means. To support work to improve access. Does that mean you've spent nearly over £2.8 million to do what? So people can get to talk to somebody about their gender issues? I think that's what you mean. However, 2.2 million of that was allocated directly to health boards with gender identity clinics. That leaves £600,000 that's not went to health boards in a year, just over a year. So who gets this £600,000 that's missing? Because over 2.8 million in just over a year, with 2.2 million of that going to health boards, who's getting £600,000 to improve the access to gender identity healthcare who are not the NHS? I think I'll need to identify that one a wee bit more going forward. And the other thing was, and I find this bizarre, but when I look back, I should have picked up on it before. I understand what trans is, right? I get that. I've met and spoke to trans people in quite at lengths in my past. However, importantly, throughout this work, we have engaged with trans and non-binary people across Scotland who have lived experiences of accessing or waiting to access gender identity services to ensure their voices are represented in our work to improve this care. This got me thinking. Less than half of 1% of people out there do not see themselves as being the same sex as or gender as they were born, right? 0.5%, less than half a percent. Less than half of 1%, right? Now, that would take in trans and non-binary, which I don't really understand how you can be non-binary. That means you don't have any sex, right? Or something that's not male or female, which beggars belief. But you've got to imagine, out of this less than half of 1%, the majority of them are trans, and the minority of them are non-binary. How many people are we talking about here? A few hundred across the whole of the UK, the whole of Scotland. Now, they go on about looking after minorities a lot in this thing with just words flung on it. And I think that's admirable. That, minorities should be, helped to look after. But not to the detriment of the majority. And that's not to say we ignore minorities. That's not what I'm saying at all, although that's how it'll be construed by others. But when we have got things like women's safe spaces, for example, which is one of the hottest potatoes in this whole thing, and when we talk about women competing in competitive sports, and they have to now compete with men who are changing their gender or their sex or whatever terminology is correct, that's not protecting the majority. That is only protecting the minority to the detriment of the majority. And this is where society's got to draw a line. Now, that is not saying minorities should not be protected, minorities should not have their interests looked after. But we can't keep doing it to the total disregard to the thoughts and well-being and safety of the majority. It's not how society works. You know, we just shouldn't, you can't do it. It's impossible. And I don't know where this cuddle loving has become with suddenly a trans issue is now taking over our parliaments. Is it, you know, trans people need healthcare and trans people need emotional care and all these things. I totally get that. And it's not, I mean, we're in 2024, for God's sake. Been, you know, I spoke to people 30 years ago with transgender issues. A guy who was born a man and believed he was a woman and went through loads of things and got all that. I mean, that would have been in the 90s, actually. So, you know, and it's probably got a lot better since then, I'm prepared to say. So people with transgender issues have never been ignored by society, and I would suggest where they are today is a lot better than they were 30, 40 years ago. And in another 10 years it'll be better than it is today. That's the way things work. But for it to become a sort of headline thing that could possibly bring down a government, it's bonkers. Absolute bonkers. And I don't know where the SNP, it probably was a Butte agreement actually, that they decided that they had to be front and centre with these types of things. And I tell you what was refreshing. Kezia Dugdale and what was it? I can't remember the Tory leader in the Scottish Tories at the time. Oh, that's terrible. Two of them, openly homosexual. They got on with their life. They just got on with it. You would see the odd photograph, maybe in polling day, they were around the polling station holding hands with a girlfriend or their wife or whatever the case may be. But they never made a big deal about it. They just kind of got on with it. And I'm quite sure when it came to voting and LGBT rights and stuff, you know, they would obviously have their, you know, very, very good and close opinions to actually make judgment on stuff like that. But the Scottish SNP leader at the time was Nicola Sturgeon. We had three women all at the same time leading the three main parties in Scotland and in Holyrood. Two of them openly homosexual, nobody had a problem with it, they went on with their life, done what they had to do. But the one that was waving the rainbow flags the most was Nicola Sturgeon, who's openly married. I just found that bizarre. You with me? Do you follow my thoughts here? Three women, all in powerful positions, two of them homosexuals, lesbians, nobody had a problem with it, they just got on with their day, but one had to get out and be a banner waver for the gay community. And the one that did was Nicola Sturgeon, who was apparently married to a man. I just found that particularly odd at the time, and retrospectively, everybody will probably agree that that was pretty odd. Okay, so there we go. The rant has lasted, well, we've overran this one. I do apologise. So if you liked the video, get a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please subscribe. But the most important thing of all, unless you're these liars in the SNP telling us total lies in Parliament and putting more money into a thing that's a very, very small number of society will benefit from, everybody else have a great day. Cheery bye now.